He gets thrown off a school rooftop by kids his own age. 10 years later, he wakes up in the same body, on the same morning, and the first thing he does is walk straight up to the guy who ruined his life and knock him flat before homeroom even starts. A teacher who spent years covering up beatings for cash suddenly finds out his own secrets are about to end him. A gang leader who never lost a fight in his life gets dropped by someone who already knows his next move before he makes it. A grandmother works herself sick trying to keep her grandson's hospital bills paid, never once thinking about giving up on him. And somewhere down the line, a rich kid with a violent streak owes our guy a favor big enough to open doors no normal student should ever get near. That's the trailer. Now let's rewind and watch it actually happen. This is a kid who used to believe in people. He believed teachers would help if he told them the truth. He believed the system was built to protect kids like him. That belief gets tested, then broken, then buried. Because the people running his school don't care about a bullied freshman. They care about money, reputation, and keeping rich parents happy. His name is Kim Hyun-sung. And this is the story of a guy who gets 10 years stolen from him, then uses every single one of those years as a weapon. Let's go back to where it starts. A rooftop. A group of kids who think beating someone half to death is a fun way to spend lunch. And a fall that should have ended everything. He goes over the edge, doesn't die. Which honestly might be worse. His body survives. His mind doesn't wake up. He's stuck, fully conscious, fully aware, locked inside a shell that won't move, won't speak, won't even blink on command. Imagine being trapped behind your own eyes for a decade, hearing everything, understanding everything, and being completely unable to do anything about it. His grandmother refuses to let go. She's the one who raised him after his parents died, and now she's the one sitting by his hospital bed, year after year, working herself into the ground just to keep the bills paid. She sells things. She takes extra shifts her body can barely handle. She never stops hoping. His little brother grows up watching his older brother rot in a hospital bed instead of getting to look up to him. And when the same bullies who put Hyun there start circling the little brother too, there's nobody left to protect him. 10 years. That's how long Hyun sits there, trapped, boiling in rage, replaying every second of what happened to him. Every punch, every laugh from the crowd, every teacher who looked the other way. He doesn't just relive it, he studies it. He plans. He builds an entire mental playbook on how he'd tear every single person responsible apart if he ever got the chance. Then one day, he wakes up. Not in year 10. Not in some hospital bed with tubes running out of his arm. He wakes up on the exact morning it all began. Same classroom, same desk, same bullies sitting a few rows over, laughing about something stupid, completely unaware that the kid they're about to destroy has just spent an entire decade turning himself into their worst nightmare. For 1 second, Hyun thinks he's hallucinating. Then he looks down at his own hands, young hands, untouched hands, and it hits him. This is real. He's back. And this time, he already knows exactly what happens next, because he's the guy who spent 10 years memorizing every second of the tragedy that's about to unfold in front of him. In the original timeline, this is the day the bullying starts small and spirals out of control over weeks. Not this time. Hyun doesn't wait around collecting his thoughts. He doesn't spend the whole episode having a quiet emotional breakdown about his second chance. He gets up, walks straight toward the kid who's about to become the first domino. Park Menchul, the guy who kicked off years of hell for him, and does something nobody in that classroom expects. He hits him first. No warning. No build-up. Just a clean shot that puts Menchul on the ground before he can even process what's happening. The whole room goes dead silent. This is the kid everyone expected to spend the semester getting stuffed into lockers, and instead, he just dropped the school's favorite bully in 3 seconds flat. And here's the part that makes it hit different. Hyun isn't guessing. He knows exactly how Menchul moves, exactly which side he favors, exactly how he reacts when he's caught off guard, because he's watched this exact scene play out in his head 1,000 times over 10 years of staring at hospital ceilings. This isn't beginner's luck. This is a guy who's had a decade to rehearse a fight most people would call unfair before it even started. Menchul isn't going down alone, though. He's got backup. A whole crew that's used to winning through sheer numbers, used to nobody fighting back, used to being untouchable, because the school lets them get away with everything. They come at Hyun expecting an easy victim. They get a wall. One by one, Hyun works through them like he's checking items off a list, because that's basically what he's doing. He already knows their tendencies. He already knows who panics, who overcommits, who's all bark. Kong Chang-suk, supposedly the strongest fighter in the whole group, the guy nobody in the school has ever seen lose, he goes down too. Not because Hyun outmuscles him in a fair fight. Because Hyun doesn't fight fair. He goes for what works. He targets what's vulnerable. He ends things fast and ugly. Because 10 years of rage doesn't leave room for playing nice. The gang's whole reputation is built on fear. Break the fear, and the whole thing collapses. And Hyun just broke it in front of the entire class. Jung Minho, another member of the crew, someone who used to genuinely enjoy watching Hyun get hurt in the old timeline, gets a taste of exactly what that feels like from the other side. The kid who used to laugh is the one crying and begging now, hands up, completely unable to fight back. It's one of those moments you just can't look away from, the exact reversal of everything that happened the first time around, and it lands like a sledgehammer. But Hyun's not done. Beating up a few classmates was never the actual goal. The real target is bigger, and it's been bigger this whole time. The adults who let this happen. A teacher shows up mid-fight, the same homeroom teacher who, in the original 10 years, took bribes from wealthy parents and buried every single complaint Hyun ever made. This guy built a nice quiet life covering up abuse in exchange for envelopes of cash. He's used to controlling situations like this with a stern voice and a threat of detention. Except, Hyun already knows every secret this teacher's been sitting on. The bribes, the cover-ups, even the affair he's been having with another teacher on staff. And instead of begging this man for help the way he did the first time around, Hyun lays it all out, calm and direct, like he's reading off a list he memorized years ago. Because he has. Watch a grown adult's entire posture change in real time. 1 second he's ready to write up a punishment. The next, he's realizing the kid standing in front of him could end his career with a single phone call. The power in that room flips instantly, and the teacher knows it. This is where it gets genuinely brutal in the best way. Later, when Hyun goes back to finish what he started with Jung Minho, the kid whose parents happened to pay this exact teacher under the table, the teacher doesn't step in, doesn't protect his usual meal ticket, just quietly turns around and walks the other way, leaving his own bribe-paying sponsor to get exactly what's coming to him. That's not an accident. That's Hyun already knowing this teacher's priorities better than the teacher knows them himself. Word travels fast in a school like this, and it isn't long before the principal gets involved. This is a man who's spent his whole career treating the school's reputation like it's more precious than any student's safety. His solution to violence is never justice. It's silence. Quiet meetings, quiet paperwork, quiet threats to families who can't afford lawyers. Except Hyun didn't make a quiet mess. He made an enormous one. Multiple kids beaten in a way that's impossible to explain away as a schoolyard scuffle, plus a teacher whose corruption just got dragged into daylight. This isn't something that disappears with a signed form and a stern warning. The administration panics. Emergency meetings get called. The principal wants this buried, and buries things get harder to do, the bigger the mess. Eventually, they land on a suspension for Hyun. The easy move, the safe move, punish the one kid who doesn't have rich parents threatening lawsuits. Hyun doesn't fight it, doesn't beg to stay, doesn't even seem bothered by it, honestly, because a school suspension is nothing compared to 10 years locked inside a body that won't move. He walks out with something way more valuable than a clean record. He walks out with proof that the entire system protecting these bullies can be broken, and he just broke the first piece of it in a single morning. He heads home, and this is where the story slows down just enough to hit you somewhere different. Because in the original timeline, his grandmother had to sell their apartment to cover his hospital bills. In this timeline, that hasn't happened yet, but he remembers every bit of the exhaustion on her face, every extra shift she picked up, every time she pretended she was fine when she clearly wasn't. Walking back into that same old house, seeing her still healthy, still upright, still years away from what she went through in the future he remembers, that hits him harder than any fight did that day. This is the moment the whole revenge plan sharpens into something bigger than just payback. Hyun isn't only out here settling scores anymore. He's trying to make sure his grandmother never has to sell everything she owns just to keep him breathing. He's trying to make sure his little brother never becomes the next kid getting cornered in a stairwell. So he sits down and does something most manhwa heroes skip straight past. He actually plans. 10 years of rage gets organized into a real strategy, instead of just blind aggression. He lays out exactly what he needs going forward. Personal strength, so nobody can put a hand on him or his family again. Reliable allies, Because doing this completely alone is how you get buried by people with more money and more lawyers than you'll ever have. Influence, because beating up a handful of teenage bullies means nothing if the adults running the world above them stay untouched. That's the actual roadmap. Not just petty revenge on classmates, a plan to climb high enough to burn down everyone who let his life get destroyed the first time around, all the way up the chain. And that's exactly when opportunity drops right in his lap, in the form of a name he remembers from 10 years of listening to the news from inside a body he couldn't move. Ko Chong Bong, heir to a massive construction fortune. Violent, unpredictable, exactly the kind of guy most people would run from. In Hyun's memories of the future, this guy ends up tangled in an ugly inheritance war with his own younger brother, a fight that ends badly for pretty much everyone involved. Using knowledge nobody else on Earth could possibly have, Hyun steps in and saves him from something that should have ended his future entirely. One favor, one moment, and suddenly Hyun's not just some kid with a grudge against a handful of bullies anymore. He's got a wealthy, dangerous ally who owes him something real. This is where the story stops being about surviving school and starts becoming something much bigger. Hyun starts explaining the first stage of his plan to help Ko Chong Bong in that inheritance fight, a plan built entirely on information from a future only Hyun has ever seen. And that's exactly where this part of the story leaves us. A kid who used to be an easy target has just started pulling strings in a fight between two of the wealthiest people in the country, and every single adult around him still has absolutely no idea why an ordinary freshman suddenly became somebody they should be terrified of. The suspension doesn't slow anything down. If anything, it hands Hyun exactly what he needs: time. Days he doesn't have to spend sitting through classes he's already lived through once. Days he can spend building the second half of his plan instead. Back at school, though, things are falling apart in a way the principal never saw coming. See, covering up one bully getting knocked out is easy. Covering up a corrupt teacher, a beaten gang, and a student who apparently turned into a completely different person overnight, that's a different problem entirely. Parents start asking questions. Staff start whispering in the hallways. And Teacher Kim, the man who spent years building a quiet little system of bribes and buried complaints, suddenly finds himself standing on ground that's cracking under his feet. Here's the thing about a guy like Teacher Kim. His whole existence at that school runs on nobody ever having leverage over him. He hands out favors, he takes his cut, he decides which complaints get written up and which ones get shredded before anyone reads them. It's worked for years. It's worked so well he probably forgot it could ever stop working. Then a freshman walks up and recites his entire playbook back to him, like he's reading off a script. The affair, the bribes, the years of quietly steering blame away from whichever kid's parents paid the most. Hyun doesn't scream any of this, doesn't threaten. He just says it, flat and calm, the way you'd read out a grocery list. And that calmness is somehow scarier than if he'd shouted it. Because screaming means a kid who's angry and might calm down. Calm means a kid who already knows he's won. From that point on, Teacher Kim isn't running the show anymore. He's managing damage. Every choice he makes gets filtered through one question. What does the kid who knows everything want from me right now? That's not a teacher anymore. That's a hostage with a classroom. And it shows almost immediately. When Hyun goes back to deal with Jung Minho, the same Minho whose family has been quietly paying Teacher Kim for protection, the teacher has every reason in the world to step in. It's literally his job. It's literally the arrangement he's built his whole reputation on. He doesn't move. He just watches Minho get exactly what's coming to him and pretends he has somewhere else to be. That single choice tells you everything about how fast the power in this school just flipped. The guy who used to sell protection is now too scared to even offer it for free. Word of that gets around fast too, because kids notice everything. They notice when the teacher who always swoops in to save Minho suddenly develops an urgent need to be anywhere else. And once kids start noticing cracks like that, the whole illusion the bullies have been running on for years starts to wobble. Meanwhile, up in the principal's office, the mood is a lot less calm. This is a man whose entire career philosophy comes down to one rule. Nothing looks bad if nobody outside the building hears about it. Doesn't matter how bad it actually is. Doesn't matter who gets hurt. As long as it stays contained, it never happened. Except Hyun didn't leave him anything small to contain. A gang of known bullies getting dropped in front of a full classroom. A teacher whose secrets are now apparently public knowledge among students. Parents on both sides, the bullies' wealthy families, and the families of kids who've been quietly suffering for years, all suddenly paying very close attention to a school that usually gets to operate completely unquestioned. Emergency meetings start stacking up. Staff get pulled in and grilled about what they knew and when. The principal tries the old move, offer a small punishment, act stern in front of cameras and parents, quietly promise the powerful families it'll all blow over in a week. That's the script that's worked for him 100 times before. Except this time, there's a wrinkle he's never had to deal with. A student who doesn't want the situation buried. A student who, if anything, seems to want it dragged out into the light as far as it'll go. That's the terrifying part for a man like the principal. His whole system depends on victims wanting it to disappear too, wanting to move on, wanting to avoid more attention, wanting to just get through the school year without more trouble. Hyun doesn't want any of that. Hyun spent 10 years wishing somebody had dragged this exact situation into the light the first time around, and now that he's got the chance, he's not about to hand the principal a quiet exit. So the suspension goes through, because someone has to be punished, and it's never going to be the kids with money behind them. But it lands different this time. It's not a punishment that ends anything. It's barely a speed bump. Hyun walks out of that meeting with a clean understanding that the wall of silence this school's been hiding behind for years just got the first real crack put in it. And cracks like that don't close back up on their own. Which brings us to the house. Small, familiar, exactly the kind of place that means nothing to anyone else on Earth, and everything to him. 10 years from now, or 10 years ago, depending on how you want to measure a life that's been rewound. This house doesn't exist anymore. It gets sold off piece by piece to cover medical bills nobody budgeted for. His grandmother spends her last healthy years working herself past exhaustion just to buy him a few more months in a hospital bed he can't even feel. Standing in the doorway of a house that, in his memory, doesn't survive the year, that's not something 10 years of rage prepared him for. All that planning, all that cold calculation about fights and leverage and blackmail, and it still catches him off guard seeing her standing there, healthy, tired from an ordinary day, instead of tired from a decade of grief. This is the moment the whole revenge plot stops being just about revenge. Because up until now, everything Hyun's done has been reactive. Hit the guy who hit him first, expose the teacher who covered it up, break the hierarchy that let it all happen. Necessary stuff, satisfying stuff, but still just clean up from the last timeline. Sitting there that night, staring at the same walls he grew up in, Hyun does something a lot of guys in his position skip completely. He stops thinking about payback and starts thinking about protection, not just avoiding what happened to him, actually building something solid enough that it can't happen to his grandmother or his little brother, no matter what comes next. That's when the real plan gets written, not a fantasy point system, not some glowing status screen counting up experience, just 3 plain requirements, laid out with the same cold clarity he's used on every bully and every teacher so far. First, strength. Real, physical, personal strength. Enough that nobody, no matter how big their gang or how much money their parents have, can put a hand on him or his family again without paying for it immediately. Second, allies. People he can actually trust. People with resources and reach he doesn't have on his own. Because doing this solo means eventually running into someone with more money and more lawyers than one furious teenager can handle alone. Third, influence. Real influence. The kind that reaches past the walls of a high school and into boardrooms and backrooms where actual decisions about people's lives get made. Because beating up a handful of classmates changes nothing if the adults who let this happen in the first place stay completely untouched. That's the blueprint. 3 lines, and an entire decade of pain compressed into a plan simple enough to execute one piece at a time. And piece number 2, allies, is about to land in his lap sooner than he expects, because Hyun remembers more than just what happened to him. 10 years trapped in a hospital bed with nothing to do but listen gives a person a strange kind of education. News segments playing in the background. Nurses talking about business scandals over his unconscious body like he wasn't even there. He absorbed all of it, stored all of it, and one name from that pile of memories is about to become extremely useful. Ko Chong-bong, heir to a construction fortune big enough that most people in the city recognize the family name on sight. Not exactly a nice guy. Violent temper, doesn't play well with others, the kind of person most students would go out of their way to avoid. But Hyun isn't most students anymore, and Hyun isn't looking for a nice guy. He's looking for someone with exactly the kind of resources a bullied freshman with a grudge could never access on his own. In the future, Hyun remembers, Ko Chang-bong gets dragged into a brutal fight over his family's inheritance against his own younger brother. A fight that, from what Hyun recalls, doesn't end well for him at all. Something goes wrong. Something costs him everything he was supposed to inherit, maybe more than that. Hyun's got information nobody else on the planet has access to. A future that hasn't happened yet, sitting in his head like a script he's already read to the end. And instead of keeping that knowledge locked away for himself, he uses it to step in and save the guy from whatever disaster is supposed to be coming his way. One intervention. One favor delivered before the danger even shows up on anyone else's radar. And just like that, a random rich kid with a bad reputation suddenly owes an ordinary freshman something that money genuinely can't buy. Trust, built entirely on results Ko Chang-bong can't explain, because there's no way a high schooler should know things like this. That's step 2 of the blueprint, checked off far faster than anyone would expect. Hyun's not just some kid anymore who happened to win a schoolyard fight. He's someone with a dangerous, wealthy ally in his corner, and an ally who owes him something he can't repay with money alone, which is exactly the leverage Hyun starts using next. He begins laying out the first stage of a plan to help Ko Chang-bong actually win that inheritance fight before it even fully starts, using knowledge of a future only one person on Earth has ever lived through. Every move mapped out in advance, every mistake from that future already identified and ready to be avoided this time around. And that's exactly the moment the story pulls back and leaves us hanging. A former punching bag, suspended from school for beating up half a gang, sitting across from one of the most dangerous rich kids in the city, calmly explaining how to win a war over a fortune that hasn't even broken out yet. Every adult around Hyun still thinks he's just a strange kid who suddenly snapped. None of them have any idea they're looking at someone who's already lived through the next 10 years and came back with a plan for every single one of them. The bullies' families don't take this quietly, and that's the first sign this fight isn't staying contained to one hallway. Park Menchal's parents stormed the school within a day, furious, demanding to know why their son got dropped in front of an entire class by a kid who's never thrown a punch in his life before that morning. Kang Chang-suk's family isn't much better, used to getting apologies handed to them for years, not used to explaining why their son lost a fight he was supposed to win by default. Here's the part that should terrify them and doesn't, because they still have no idea who they're actually dealing with. They think this is a fluke, a lucky punch, maybe some hidden martial arts training nobody knew about. What they can't imagine, what nobody in that building could possibly imagine, is that the freshman they're demanding get expelled has already watched every argument they're about to make play out before, 10 years ago, from a version of this exact same week. Hyun doesn't flinch through any of it, doesn't posture, doesn't panic, doesn't even bother explaining himself to people who wouldn't believe the truth even if he said it out loud. He already knows how this meeting ends. He already knows which parent threatens a lawsuit and then quietly backs off once somebody reminds them their own son started it. He's not guessing his way through this confrontation. He's replaying it. That kind of calm unsettles adults way more than shouting ever could. A kid who should be scared, defensive, crying, apologizing. Instead, he's just sitting there like he's already read the ending. Meanwhile, Lee Jung-min, the friend with glasses, the one Hyun used to stick his neck out for in the very first version of this story, watches all of this unfold from the sidelines with something between confusion and disbelief. This is the same quiet kid who used to get shoved into lockers while everyone looked away. In the timeline Hyun remembers, defending Jung-min is actually what dragged him into the bully's crosshairs in the first place. Except now the order's flipped completely. Jung-min isn't watching his friend get destroyed for standing up for him. He's watching the same friend walk through the people who used to terrorize both of them, like they're nothing. There's no dramatic reunion speech, no tearful thank you, just a kid who spent years flinching every time footsteps got too close, slowly realizing he might not have to flinch anymore. That relationship isn't loud in this part of the story, but it's sitting there quietly in the background, and it's exactly the kind of thread that's going to matter more the further this goes. At home, the little brother is watching something different play out, and honestly, this might be the part that hits hardest of everything so far. In the original 10 years, this kid grows up watching his older brother turn into a name people whisper about, a hospital bed instead of a person, a tragedy instead of an older sibling to actually look up to. And once Hyun's gone, guess who the bullies decide to target next? The little brother gets pulled into the exact same nightmare, alone, with nobody left strong enough to step in for him. This time, that story doesn't get the chance to start. His older brother comes home from a school day that ended in a suspension, sits down at the same dinner table, and for the first time doesn't feel like a ticking clock counting down to a rooftop. The little brother doesn't fully understand what changed. He just knows his brother suddenly seems different, sharper, calmer, like something that used to be soft in him, hardened into something else entirely. He doesn't ask too many questions. Kids rarely do when things start getting better instead of worse. But Hein watches him differently now, too. Every time he looks at his little brother, he's not just seeing a kid, he's seeing a countdown he's already lived through once. A countdown he's determined to erase completely. That's not soft protectiveness. That's the kind of protectiveness that comes from someone who's already buried the alternative in his memory and refuses to let it happen twice. And that protectiveness comes with an edge to it, because 10 years locked inside a body that couldn't move does something to a person's sense of mercy. Hyun's not the same kid who used to believe telling the truth to an adult would fix anything. That belief died somewhere around year 3 of staring at a hospital ceiling. What replaced it isn't hatred exactly. It's something colder, a willingness to do whatever the plan requires, without spending time agonizing over whether it's fair to the people standing in the way. He says as much, quietly, to himself more than to anyone else, that he's stopped caring whether certain people around him come out of this okay. Not everyone. Not his grandmother, not his brother, not Jung-min, but the ones who built their comfortable lives on top of kids like him getting hurt? He's done pretending their well-being matters to him. That's not a villain arc. That's just what's left after 10 years of nobody helping. Back at school, the committee finally reconvenes to decide what official consequences actually look like. And the principal walks in, already knowing this is the hardest meeting he's run in years. He's got wealthy parents demanding blood on one side and a growing pile of witnesses and rumors about a corrupt teacher on the other, and no version of let's quietly handle this internally survives contact with both at once. Teacher Kim sits through that meeting like a man watching his own execution get scheduled. Every question aimed at how did this happen edges dangerously close to questions about who knew what and when. He answers everything as vaguely as he possibly can, stalling, deflecting, praying nobody pulls the thread all the way to the end of it. He's not thinking about punishing Hyun anymore. He's thinking about surviving the meeting with his job intact. The final decision that comes out of it isn't justice. It's damage control dressed up as justice. A short suspension for Hyun, quiet warnings for the bullies that everyone in the room knows won't stick, and absolutely no mention of bribery, affairs, or cover-ups anywhere in the official record. That's the system working exactly as designed. Protect the institution first. Protect the money second. Everything else is optional. Win walks out of that meeting completely unsurprised, because he's seen this exact kind of outcome before, in 100 smaller ways, over 10 years of watching adults protect each other instead of kids. The difference now is, he's not walking out empty-handed. He's walking out with a teacher who owes him silence, a gang whose reputation is already cracked beyond repair, and a rich, dangerous ally waiting on the other side of everything with a fortune-sized problem only Hyun knows how to solve. That night, sitting across from Ko Chong-bong, Hyun lays the first real piece of his plan on the table, not vague reassurances, not empty promises about trust me, specifics, pulled directly from a future Ko Chong-bong hasn't lived yet, and Hyun has already watched play out once from a hospital bed, with nothing else to do but memorize every detail of it. He tells him which moves in the inheritance fight are traps, which family members can't be trusted, no matter how loyal they act right now, which mistake, if avoided this time, changes the entire outcome of a war Ko Chong-bong was originally destined to lose. Ko Chong-bong doesn't know how a random high schooler could possibly know any of this. He just knows the last piece of information Hyun handed him already saved him from something disastrous. And that's more proof than most people ever get before deciding to trust someone completely. A wealthy heir with a violent streak, and a random freshman with a grudge against the entire school system. An unlikely pair, but exactly the kind of alliance Hyun's whole three-part plan was built to find. Strength, secured in a single morning that shattered a bully hierarchy years in the making. Allies, arriving faster than expected in the form of a dangerous heir who owes him everything. Influence, that's the piece still sitting on the table, half-built, waiting for Hyun to finish laying it out. And that's exactly where this part of the story leaves everyone hanging. A teacher terrified of his own student. A principal who thinks he buried a scandal that's still very much alive underground. A gang that used to run the school now flinching every time Hyun walks past. And a fortune-sized war between two brothers, about to get flipped completely upside down by a freshman nobody in that boardroom has ever even heard of. Every single person around him still believes he's just some kid who suddenly snapped one morning. None of them understand they're standing next to somebody who already lived through everything that's coming and came back with a plan this time.